Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Time to Talk Titanic. So you might notice someone on the screen, if you're watching this on YouTube, who isn't too familiar to you, that you've maybe not seen on here before, but you definitely, if you're a Titanic enthusiast, you will recognize Bill Willard. We have the man, the myth, the legend on the podcast today, and I was just saying to him before I hit record, it really is an honor to have him on, and an honor to have heard that he had listened to the podcast and that he was following it on social media. I'd posted in a few Facebook groups, and that's how Bill and I connected on the Facebook. I don't use it much these days, but it's very good for connecting in groups. I think that's where it shines. And basically, Bill was kind of just wanting to know when the episode regarding, is it grave robbing? Should we be raising artifacts? Bill was just wondering when that would be live. And when you're watching this, it probably will be live. You'll probably have seen that already. So it's just a little bit of cohesion. It's nice to have someone that's played such a pivotal role in, not just raising such a significant bit of history when it comes to Titanic, but also, as we'll get into, kind of clamping down on the darker side, the more kind of seedier underbelly of the whole operation of, raising artifacts or not doing so. So, with all that said, we cannot wait to get started. And I also have my amazing co-host and co-founder of Time to Talk Titanic, Louis.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm not bad. I'm really looking forward to this. And as Aaron said, Bill, it's amazing to have you here. Thank you for your time to speak to us. We've spoken to ancestors of survivors before, Simon Medhurst, but to have someone that's had such a hands-on experience with the Titanic themselves, it's incredible. And I don't think when Aaron and I thought about doing a podcast that we'd have these sort of guests coming on, so it's amazing to have you, so thank you. Yeah,
honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
So just before we hit record, you'd gone to say something, and I got in there, I hit that button. It's interesting. I'm really looking forward to hearing your kind of take on this. So we had kind of discussed earlier kind of how we felt, and I don't know if we kind of landed on a very specific kind of general consensus. I think personally I wouldn't call it grave robbing, but I think that's because I disagree with the definition of what is a grave. Should we define that as a grave? But then we were looking at a quote from Melvina Dean, who at the time, I think the article was from 2006, so should be 94, was very clear in saying her dad was still on that ship in her eyes. And I thought it was important to try and look at this kind of debate from the perspective of a survivor. But what's your take on it initially? So, people listening who have just watched our previous recording can kind of get your take on it.
Well, I'm going into this blind. I don't know what everyone said a little earlier today. Just to give you a little history, I am a Titanic family member. I had a distant cousin on board, Constance Willard, first class passenger. Her ancestry and mine cross about 7 generations back. All of her family is from Horsford, Kent, and so is mine, and we intersect. And so we have the same common ancestor from that area. So
we'll be back in 2 seconds.
Not a problem.
So the distance away is significant, but I studied Titanic starting in 1974. So this is my 48th year of when I've been studying, reading, researching. And in the middle of those, I've been out to the wreck site twice. I've invented a camera system, an ROV, that went down in 1998, and our team brought up the big piece. Yeah. The big piece is currently in the Luxor. A small part of it, the little piece, is in Orlando at the exhibit there.
I did like that it's kind of affectionately known as the little big piece, so that made me smile. That's very sweet.
The little piece, somebody added the little big piece to make it cutesy, but originally it was the little piece, big piece, little piece. So,
big piece, little piece. I like that.
what happened was it was so large it wouldn't fit on a flatbed in order to transport it safely and carefully. So they had to remove the bottom limit of it, and that's what became the little piece.
Right.
George Tulloch, who began the recovery process, had three fundamental beliefs. Number one is that the artifacts should be recovered and preserved and conserved and taken care of. First rule. Number two, he felt that they should not be sold at auctions to the public. If I sell you a piece and I sell Louis a piece and I sell somebody a piece in Ireland and someone a piece in Chicago and somebody a piece in California, the ship disappears.
Yeah.
He felt that the artifacts should be kept together as a collection and not sold that way. And the third thing that was what I consider one of the most important parts is that they should be put on display so that the story of Titanic is perpetuated. Now, we have books.
Yeah.
Very few people read anymore, but we have books. Nothing makes the Titanic story more real than something that is visible and tangible and touchable, such as an artifact, such as a piece that tells a story. An example of that is the Battle of Gallipoli, an incredible battle in World War I. There is an artifact that was found. Now, a lot of people were killed in that battle. It was a horrific loss for the British and the Australian and the New Zealand troops when they attacked and were just totally outnumbered and overwhelmed and ambushed. But there's a bullet that has passed through another bullet. Wow. It's in the museum down there, and it hit in midair, and bullet A penetrated through, it's just going through it.
That's incredible.
And the story, you can describe that like I just did to you, but until you look it up and see it online, you're going to go, wow, look at that. Yeah. Imagine standing in a museum and it's in front of you in a display case, and the story is described while you're listening to it about how the battle ensued and what happened and everything like that. But to make something visible and tangible and touchable makes it real to us.
Yes.
Our generations, our humanity. And that's what George Tulloch felt was important.
And George Tulloch he was head of RMS Titanic Incorporated at the time of the expedition. So in 1998, he was the head.
He started the recovery process, and he was in charge until 1999 when he was ousted in an illegal takeover, public corporation. But George had those beliefs, and he pressed those beliefs. I totally support that 100%. If we're not going to take care of them and we're not going to put them so that you can see them, we need an exhibit that's, touring the UK. We need an exhibit that's touring Canada. We need some that goes to France and the US and whoever else wants these. We need an exhibit so that the story is told and the story is remembered and perpetuated. Until Titanic was discovered in 1985, people had just pretty much forgotten about it. It was just a small group of Titanic people. And then all of a sudden, Titanic discovered, and then the whole world reignites a love for the ship. And that was in 1985. And then it started waning again later in the early 90s. And then this movie came out in 1997 called Jack and Rose on the Love Boat. And even though James Cameron added the Jack and Rose story, behind it gave all of us what the ship really looked like. It was in color. It was moving. It was massive. It was beautiful. It was ornate. It was magnificent. And an entire world went.
Yeah.
And the Titanic groups that are out, their membership more than quadrupled in many cases. It went from 100 to 500 and 600 in some situations of people that wanted to learn more. And of course, that number's waning down now because it's been 24 years since Cameron's movie. Believe it or not, I had a student come into my classroom. I taught high school and now I'm teaching. I'm a professor at a college here in the States. And one of my students comes in and says, Coach Willard, how many times have you seen Titanic? This was at the theater before
Yeah.
it came to DVD. And I said, 7. I said, I'm thinking about going again in a couple of weeks. And she said, tonight I'm going. It's my 27th time. I just love Jack. And I cry every time he dies. 27 times. This was a 16-year-old girl, and she learned the story of Titanic watching what happened there. So
you can see how it became the highest grossing film of all time with one individual going to see it that many times. That's incredible.
Absolutely. And I know people now who have come to my presentations who have said, well, I need to go back and watch that movie. I know the ship sinks, but I just need to watch the movie now, I guess. Yeah. And I'm going, you hadn't seen it yet? That's one of the most incredible films of the century. But anyway, I'm sort of biased. So I got involved the night that that Bob Ballard, his special aired from National Geographic. I'm a very, very, strong science. I think of things from different perspectives. And as little Jason Jr. is doing like this and showing what this hallway looks like, my mind is going, what is in that first stateroom on your right? What is in the first stateroom on your left? Because to me, that is where the gold is. Now, I don't mean gold as in a chunk of coin. I mean gold as in you get to see a bed frame, you get to see a chair, you get to see a dresser, you get to see a cargo trunk that they pack their clothes in. Yeah. That is the story.
The story. I was just going to say, yeah.
And for each of the things that they brought up one suitcase that they don't know who it belonged to, but it had a purple suit in it. Purple.
Wow.
So they have no idea. They figure it was a male. They have an approximate height. They have an approximate body size based on the size of the clothes, but there was no identifier inside as to who it belonged to. But this man's story still lives, even though we don't know who he is yet.
I can't even imagine that. A purple suit. That's incredible. Like in 1912.
Oh, and it was still pressed in the suitcase. And of course, the recovery, if there is leather involved, there is a process called tannin. When you tan a hide, the tannin is what makes the leather waterproof, and it gives it that sort of brownish tint to it. Okay. The tannin preserves everything around it. So in a leather suitcase or a leather valise, all those items are preserved.
Yeah.
They found a suitcase. It was a carry bag, really. And inside of it were sale catalogs and some musical notes and a clarinet. And it belonged to a man called Howard Irwin. And one of the neat things that Howard had in that bag were love letters from his girlfriend in America named Pearl Shuttle. Now, I had a friend, he passed away a few years ago, named Dave Shuttle, who was not a Titanic fan. He was a New York Yankees baseball fan. And he was turning the channel, and all of a sudden he stops on this thing that's talking about these letters, and it says, Pearl Shuttle wrote the letters. And he goes, that's my grandfather's sister was Pearl. That's my Aunt Pearl. I know Aunt Pearl. And it really was his great aunt. And so he found out that his grandfather's sister was engaged to Howard Irwin, had written their love letters between a girl who loves her boy and between the boy who loves the girl. It was beautiful. What happened to Howard?
That although she wasn't on the ship, in a way she was on the ship. Her story has now become forever intertwined with the story of Titanic, despite the fact she never set foot on it. That's incredible.
Well, the thing that they researched and they found out was what happened to Howard Irwin. Howard had taken his bags to be put on the ship, and that night had been shanghaied, literally hit over the head, knocked out, and put on a tramp steamer to Australia.
Oh.
his friend Henry Soothall was waiting for him to board the ship and couldn't find him. So Henry went ahead and got on board thinking maybe he's already on board. And they never saw each other because Howard was on his way to Australia. And it took several months to work its way down to Australia. Now on a tramp steamer, they told him, you got two choices, you work or you starve to death. So he had to work. They wouldn't let him off because they knew he'd run away. Pearl gets notification after Titanic sinks that Howard was not a survivor. So she thinks her love is lost, that he's died. By the time he could get word to her that he was still alive, she married someone else.
Why wasn't that the movie?
That is a true love story on Titanic. It really was. It really was. So
That
much
is incredible.
So much of these real stories that aren't being known. We know of of Isidore and Ida Strauss. I will not, I will not go before the other men. And then Ida climbs out and says, where you go, I go. I will not leave you now. And then they walk off together and she chooses to die. Well, the Attergool 14, the same thing happened. Mary and Catherine Burke climbed into the lifeboat, and Catherine's husband, John, he was a male. They said, not at this time. And his wife is expecting. He climbs out and says, I'm staying with John. And so John's sister, Mary, climbs out and says, I'm staying with you. We're going to stay together. We're not going separate. We're not going to separate. I'm not going to leave you, my husband. I will stay with you and we will survive or perish together. That's the second case of that happening. But nobody knows it's the Burke story, but everybody knows the Strauss story. So many of those things. There's a possibility that two of the unknowns are either Mary or Catherine Burke. And there's a chance that they could be one of the Burkes, or they could be both of the Burkes. The physical descriptions are very close. So those are the things that happen when you recover an artifact or you recover something that's personal. You find out a little bit more about that person. We have people in third class who carried their entire life with them in one bag. Everything that they owned, everything they had, everything that was who they were, they brought with them. And we don't know much about a lot of people. We know some things. We may know when they were born and when they died and who their mother was because of a census record. But we didn't know what was important to them because they would have taken it with them. So,
I remember I couldn't tell you off the top of my head who the account was from. But I remember reading a survivor account that said that there was a rush of third-class passengers came onto the boat deck holding all their possessions, and that this survivor noticed some of the first-class men and women giggling to themselves because of how silly they looked, that they'd rushed upstairs with all of their stuff. One, ignoring the fact that these people might have seen flooding, or that they were just terrified that they were going to lose, like you said, everything they owned, even if that was just a bag of possessions. That's their life, And reading that account, it was so awful, because of that fear of, a lot of them, they weren't going on a holiday, they were moving, they were immigrating to the US. I think you've put so beautifully because it is about the story, it's about the humanity of it, and I worry sometimes that that's being lost. I mean, I think I've mentioned it every single time we've done the podcast, but I can't believe that there are inflatable slides of the Titanic that you can hire at a kid's party. I just think that's...
almost bought one time.
Oh, it's insanity. Like, would I have gone on one when I was a child? Absolutely. Would I have felt conflicted about it for the rest of my life? Absolutely. But
especially when you got older, yes.
Yeah, I'd be sitting here now.
If you were a young kid, you would have said, let's do it again.
Exactly, yeah. And I guess in a way, that's in its own unusual way, it's helping to keep the story of Titanic alive. But you're right that this story of Titanic is in these staterooms that are, locked doors that haven't been opened since that night in 1912. and there are so many stories that we just don't know about. That's in 2012 when Julian Fellows did the ITV miniseries Titanic. I was so excited. I had such high hopes, and then I watched it, and I was so devastated that it was such a missed opportunity, because, like you're saying, there's so many stories, you know, similar to the Straussies, but they're not the Straussies. But we keep getting shown that over and over again, which it's worthwhile. It's a worthy story to tell, but there are other stories to tell. I really, my hope is that Netflix, I say Netflix, it could be any of them, but do something about the Titanic. I think you're right, the interest is waning a little bit. I don't think a movie studio would ever try and make another Titanic. I don't think they would try and risk, you know, putting so much money into something like that nowadays. It's all superheroes and that kind of thing, movies nowadays. But I think if Netflix did a series with multiple episodes, all an hour plus long, and just really focused on the humanity of it, that's something I'd love to see one day.
One of the stories that I love, again, one of the areas of my research is the Addergool 14. I've been to County Mayo in Ireland, and the village there is warm, so friendly to me. They accepted me as a friend right away. I made my embraces. We embraced each other before we left. They were such good people, and they were so amazed that others outside of their village cared about their story. Delia McDermott, her mother saved and bought her a hat and gloves before she left. And now these are people that had to save for 3 years to pay for a ticket that was £7 in UK money. Okay. That's in American, that's $10 roughly today, you know. So it's how much is £7 in euros?
In euros, be a little bit more. So say like 8 or 9, about that.
Which is chump change today. Anybody can get that pretty quickly. But it took these families 3 years of work, because that's how they existed. They didn't have a lot of money. They traded their food and their skills to survive. But she bought Delia a hat and scarves, because all young ladies in America wear hats. You can't be in America without a hat. So as the Addergool 14 made it up to the boat deck, Delia climbed into a lifeboat. Now, to get from their cabins up to the boat deck, the guys had to put their hands, like make a cradle, have the ladies step into it, and they'd boost them up to the next level. And then one of the guys boosted the other one, and he'd jump up and catch the hand, and they'd pull each other up. They had to do this because everything was either locked or closed, or they had no way to get up there.
Yeah.
So Delia says, just a minute. And she jumps out of the lifeboat. She makes her way back down to her cabin by herself to get her hat, because all ladies of America have to have a hat. She goes all the way back the same route. I don't know how she climbed up, if she jumped up herself and pulled herself, or someone boosted her. I don't know how she got there.
Yeah.
She made it and got into the very last lifeboat leaving Titanic. She is the only Titanic survivor that was in 2 different lifeboats. Nobody knows that story very much, that she was in 2 different lifeboats. But if you bring up something and you show a 3rd class artifact, you can tell a 3rd class story. It may not be Delia's hat that you find, but you can tell the story about Delia's hat.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things George Tulloch wanted to do, is to take the artifacts and use those as a segue or as a mechanism to bring in, as you said, the humanity of what this really meant. And I know Frank Goldsmith Jr. personally. Frank's grandparents, John and Emily Goldsmith, were on board, and his father was young Frankie Goldsmith. And to him, he lost his grandfather on that ship. He never knew his grandfather, Frank John Goldsmith. Little Frankie was 9. And so as he got older, Frank Jr., his grandmother told him the story about everything, and just not very long before she passed. but she opened up and told him about it and things like that. Frank totally supports the recovery of artifacts for the purpose of preserving them and putting them on display and for the education.
Yeah.
And I think the majority of the people that are true Titanic enthusiasts, Titanic lovers, Titanic researchers that support recovery, support it for that fact, to
Yes.
put them on display for education. I will not support auctioning them off to the highest bidder and dispersing them to rich people. I would rather them not be recovered than to have that happen to them.
I was going to say that the implication with, if you accuse someone of grave robbing, that implies that there's a financial benefit to be had from it. But in these cases, it's educational. You know, the people, they're coming to see it, they're coming to read about the object, or like you say, it might not be the hat, but it can lead on to a story about a hat. And kind of bouncing off of that, there had been people that had been going down to the wreck and retrieving artifacts solely for profit. Could you speak to that a little bit? Because obviously there was something you then went on to approach, you know, getting like a court order put in. I don't want to spoil too much, but you pretty much you stopped it, which I think is very commendable of you to do, because that really makes me, I don't like that. The fact that they're going down to the wreck, damaging it in the process, from what we can gather, and selling what they find, that I really don't like that.
Yeah. In 1999, there was a takeover of the company. George Tulloch was ousted and new leadership came in. And what they wanted to do was to usurp control of Titanic from the Norfolk, Virginia Admiralty Court. Now, the Admiralty Court in Virginia, at the time of the discovery and at the time that salvor status was awarded, was led by Judge J. Calvert Clark. Now, Judge Clark had ruled on the Lusitania. He had ruled on the Empress of Ireland. He had ruled on the Central America, the American ship that sank off the coast of Savannah, Georgia, that had Civil War Reconstruction gold on it, quite a bit of Reconstruction gold. So he had done a lot of Admiralty Court rulings. And when he came up with this decision about Titanic, he said, and I'm paraphrasing, please, I don't want to quote Judge Clark. His words were too magnificent for me to try to quote him without having it in front of me. But what Judge Clark said was that Titanic is a special wreck. It is in international waters, but it's not just a regular ship.
Yeah.
It is a ship of legend. It is a ship of incredible strength. And quite a few of the passengers that were on it are still alive. And so he worked out this hybrid situation where the company would not sell the artifacts. If you find another ship out there that sank, a passenger ship or a cargo ship that sank in the 1920s, it would be yours in international waters. You could sell whatever you recovered it from and those would be yours without question. It's an international water salvage wreck. So Judge Clark worked out that wonderful hybrid decision that the company agreed to. In his tutelage was Judge Rebecca Beach Smith. Upon Judge Clark's retirement, Judge Smith took over, and now she is the person who is I don't want to say watchdog, but she watches over Titanic to make sure that somebody protects Titanic. In 1999, upon this takeover, this new group wanted to try to wrest the control away from the judges, and sell them. They wanted to take them and put them in auctions and make lots of money off of them because it was an international shipwreck. And all the other international. So they were going to challenge it. They even took it to the highest American court, the Supreme Court, who refused to side with them. They sided with Judge Smith and the previous agreements and Judge Clark and things. We were very happy about that. But in 2000, I received a phone call from one of the people in charge. And what I was told their plan was, they wanted a flying eyeball. and my ROV would fit that description and would work. They wanted to drill holes in the sides of the ship, send in the eyeball to see what was in the room, take a device in, scrape everything out, and sort through it on the surface. That's almost a direct quote. And we scoop everything out and we sort through it when we get to the surface. And I thought, not no, but absolutely no. And so I called quite a few of my network, handful of friends, and we all sent the very next day a letter to Judge Clark. And Judge Clark, and I informed them what I was told. The others had informed them what I was told, and my name was all over it. And they said, this will severely damage the integrity of the hull of the ship if you're going to go through and drill holes so that you can go into every stateroom from the outside. You can't maintain the strength of that hull if you do that. And there were a lot of, emotional things going on. This is ripping the ship apart. It's not natural, things like that. So Judge Clark issued an order on July 28th of 2000. It's an executive order from the bench that told the company that was already at the wreck site, they were there, that they could not detach or recover from the bow. If something was sitting on the bow that was not attached, yes, they could recover off the deck, for example, like a
I think in the forward well deck, there's like a gold radiator, for example, like a heater. So
okay.
Because that it shouldn't be there, it's fallen out at some point. So for example, that would be fair game.
That would be game because it would not be attached. Mm-hmm. One of the things they did try to recover was the builder's plaque, which is between the two cargo cranes. And the court said that was okay because that was a significant piece of history. And technically it was just hanging on as a plaque. And that is not damaging the ship to recover that. That piece fell and it's still down on the deck between those cranes in some debris. Mm-hmm. But that stopped those holes from being drilled. So I'm very pleased that Judge Clark issued that order. There has been another expedition called the Rogue Expedition that went out in 2002. And I heard about it. I did some investigation. I emailed some of the suppliers to the Rogue Expedition. And before you know it, I started getting photographs of the people on the expedition. Yes, these are great. I tried to get video and they were not allowed to send me any video. Mm-hmm. But I did get confirmation that there were artifacts illegally recovered. There's a BBC show called Inside Out, and they did a special on it. And they show a huge artifact that was recovered, and it was taken to, in the UK, to the manufacturer the man who runs it, his grandfather had made the piece. It was a porthole, a large porthole. And they asked the grandson to fix it, to make it to where it's back right. And so the grandson did confirm this was a very recent recovery. And it was Titanic. He confirmed it by the part number. So we do know that there were some things recovered illegally. We know the people that were involved. We have their photographs. They deny it, but we have their photographs. And a lot of things that we think the purpose for that Rogue Expedition was at the same time as that was going on the Atlantic Ocean. The leader of the company was in Judge Clark's courtroom, and I was there in Judge Clark's courtroom that day as well. Mm-hmm. The leader of the company said, we are relinquishing salvage status. We're no longer going to be the salvers of Titanic. Mm-hmm. And the purpose was this group who was recovering would go to a different salvage court where they think that they could get a different ruling and be allowed to sell. Their purpose was to steal the control from the Admiralty Court in Norfolk, Virginia. Judge Clark, he got mad. And I'm back there going, yes. Judge Clark says, what do you mean you give up the salver status? This is not something you can just choose to give up. This is a responsibility your company has accepted. And only until we take it away from you, are you relieved of that obligation.
Yeah.
So the rogue expedition had to keep everything very quiet. And I'll send you the link to where you can watch that BBC interview, and you'll see some interesting things there. You'll get to see me with dark hair and a lot of it, because it was about 20 years ago.
That would be good, actually. I'd really, because I did try and find it, because I saw it in an article I was reading. Possibly it could be the article that I wrote this quote from you down, which I loved. It is tough to police the North Atlantic. I think that says all, really, because how do you do that?
Can't. Anybody that can get a ship to the site and can get some type of a remotely operated vehicle, and a tether that's 3 to 4 miles long, can go and do something at the wreck site. And there's no planes that fly over it often. There's no satellites that are tasked to maintain it. So it's tough to police North Atlantic.
I can't even, shocking to hear that they wanted to cut holes in the side of the hull and just scrape everything out and just filter through it. That's really, I've always been one of those people that doesn't quite agree with the humanizing of the ship. People almost personified the ship itself. And I think people should focus on the actual humans that were on it and lost their lives, or that survived and lost loved ones. But hearing that almost made me feel like the ship was personified. It almost made it seem like they were injuring this, almost like, I visualize it almost like a whale, like a beached whale. And, it just wants to be either left alone or pushed back into the water and going its way. But instead, people come and just start hacking from it and taking from it and exploiting it. And
similar to hacking down the wall of a famous castle,
yeah,
or something that's been there and has been a landmark for many, many years, arbitrarily is decided to be changed. It really affects people that way. P.H. Nargile said it best. He said Titanic was a beautiful ship, beautiful ship. And then it became a beautiful shipwreck. And now it's a very old shipwreck. And he said nothing is going to stop the ship's loss. It will disappear eventually. It will. I think it was Arthur C. Clarke wrote Ghosts of the Grand Banks. And if you read that, he describes off the coast of the Grand Banks, which is where Titanic's resting place is a large iron deposit, where Titanic once was, is his futuristic writing of it. And that used to make me teary, because that's going to happen to it. And for the people who say leave the artifacts alone, if we don't recover them, they will be destroyed. So by saying leave them alone, you're saying I want those pieces destroyed. I don't want anything down there destroyed. No. The only way to save those suitcases, pots, dishes, pieces of the equipment of the ship, photographs that may still be down there. The only way to save those things is to recover them. You can't just go down and say, we're going to save all this, the rest of it can disappear. Yeah. They're going to be destroyed if you don't save them. So do you want it destroyed? And this is the question when people want to call me a grave robber or a ghoul and things. I say, so you support destroying all the things that are down there? Yeah. Because you can't save it unless you recover it. So,
and I can understand. No, do you agree with the idea that it's not a grave? And in the true sense of a grave, I guess people maybe have different, because that's where I kind of found myself, that because I don't agree that it's a grave. I think the example I gave was Lockerbie, for instance. Bomb goes off on a plane, the plane comes down on a small town, and horrific. But you wouldn't look at that town or the houses it landed on or the field that the fuselage was found in and call that a grave. You would just say this is a field where, in the sky above it, something awful happened, and there'd be reverence, you'd remember it, but you wouldn't refer to it as a grave, despite the fact that there would have been bodies there. And I feel like, do you think there's a certain unique reverence when it comes to Titanic, a heightened reverence, because it's so iconic and so known, that people feel they feel so much more emotional about it.
I will agree that there more than likely were people in the ship when it sank.
Yeah.
Okay. The engineers, for example, were trying to keep the lights on. And as the bow went very deep, you know, they're in there still trying to save the lights. I don't think all of them made it to the surface.
No.
I would think that there were some people that were down in the third class areas. I don't see it as a grave site. I see it as a place to be memorialized. Your Lockerbie example is an excellent example. I'd never heard that, but as you were saying that, I thought, wow, that's very, very similar. It's a good analogy to what happened at Titanic.
Mm-hmm.
I know that they have the Hood and the Bismarck up off the coast of Scotland over in the North Sea. And I know they have the Arizona and Hawaii. And I don't know if there are human remains in either one of those. They're war wrecks, ships that went down during wartime are protected by their home country. Germany maintains the rights over Bismarck and the UK over the Hood. Horrible, horrible losses, both during a horrible war. Arizona was the same way.
Mm-hmm.
But there are pieces of the Arizona all over America.
Yeah.
The tea set that was in the captain's cabin is in the Arizona legislature. It's somewhere in the state of Arizona, because they did take it out, and it was much later they sealed it and allowed nobody else to go down after a certain point.
Mm-hmm.
I don't view it as a grave site.
Yeah.
I do agree with you totally that it is an immense place of reverence and respect.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's the scene of an accident, I believe. And that's what it is. That, you know, it's the scene of an accident. And you'd mentioned a battle earlier. So if we were in a field and we were digging it up for whatever reason, and you came across a helmet or a dog tag, you wouldn't leave that there. No one would leave that there. You would take it and you would bring it to someone that could verify its authenticity, that would put it in a museum. So I don't see why some people, I get it, and everyone's entitled to their opinion, but I don't see why some people, when it comes to Titanic, would just want to leave it there. You know, because it's so, I just think it's so much better off being brought up and seen. And especially the debris field, you know, and when you think, you know, people wouldn't have actually lost their lives on the seafloor, they'd have lost their lives above the surface, really, or on the surface. So technically the reverence should actually be on the surface of the North Atlantic and not 2.5 miles below. It's very interesting, and I got a lot of responses on the various different Facebook groups, and some of them quite vitriolic, not towards me, maybe just between people. You know how it gets. I'm sure you've seen it. People have their opinions and they want you to hear it, but I do. I think you're right. I totally agree with you. I think that the stories need to be known, and there are so many untold stories. And I mean, I would never want to cut a hole in the side of the ship and scrape out that's just outlandishly evil. Like, that's something like a cartoon villain would want to do to the Titanic. So thank you for helping to ensure that didn't happen, because that would have been a travesty.
It would have been. It would have been. There are so many, like you said, there's the side that says, absolutely leave it alone. We don't need to go down anymore. We don't need to learn anymore. Let nature take its course. And then there's the side that says, why didn't you recover everything you could when you had the chance? Because in 500 years, I won't be here. At least if I am, I'm going to be very, very old. But in 500 years, when my great-great-grandchildren go and see these artifacts and goes to see the big piece and say, we had a family member help raise that. This is the importance of this ship. They will know what happened in April of 1912 because that piece is there. And people are saying, why didn't you bring up everything that you could while you could? For those to say, leave it alone, you're stopping all these others.
Yes.
You don't have the right to tell the others that they should believe differently. One of the things that I used to love to do, and I still love to do it, I will be going to see the big piece sometime soon. It'll be my first time to see it at the Luxor in August of 23, a year from this August, will be the 25th anniversary of when we raised her, the big piece.
Yeah.
And I plan on being there for the 25th anniversary. But I will go and I will find a chair or I'll find a place to sit because I want to watch people come in. And I've seen some people come in and look at it and just turn and say, okay, what's next? They'll go to the next part. When I went to Chicago, some idiot had taken his gum and he'd stuck it on the big piece. And I'd climbed up and I had a VIP tag, so it's not like I was going to damage or anything. I said, does anybody have a Kleenex? Some idiot put some gum up here and I had like 15 people, here, use this.
Yep.
So I grabbed a couple of the Kleenexes and I started cleaning up, and the museum staff said, what happened? And I said, somebody put gum on it and I'm trying to clean it off. And they brought in, some cleaner to try to get the gummy part off. And, there's always going to be some of those, but that's the less than the 1%.
Yes.
You'll see the people stand in front of it. And I've seen grown men, my age, I'm 60. And I've seen grown men with tears streaming down their face as they stare at what's left. And this huge piece is a little piece of the ship. And they understand what it represents. It doesn't represent a hunk of a piece of metal off the bottom of the ocean. It represents Isadora Nida Strauss, and it represents Delia McDermott, and it represents every name that was on there. It represents Father Thomas Biles, who chose not to save himself, but in order to provide absolution for the Catholics there, to give them some kind of peace facing imminent doom. That was a choice he absolutely made. That's who it represents. And that is why George wanted to bring that up, is this is something that's visible and tangible. They ask you not to touch it, but people try to sneak a hand on it. I'm not telling people to try to do that. There is a piece you can touch in Orlando. There's a little opening and you can touch a piece of the ship, and they allow you to do that. And you can feel what it feels, touch a piece of Titanic, but it's visible and it's tangible, and it represents so much more. It represents the 3,000 men in Belfast that put this ship together, that worked 7 days a week from sunup to sundown, who took pride in their work, who thought this was the most magnificent thing ever built. And we made it here in Belfast at Harland and Wolff. We made this. It represents the passengers that got on board, and it represents their families who waved goodbye to them, most for their last time. It represents people who have, Don Lynch is an outstanding researcher. George Behe, Charles Haas, the late Jack Eaton, and I've named 4, and there's dozens more. Phil Gowan, Mark Churnside, Paul Lee. There's so many of these great people that have continued to tell us about people and about the stories surrounding all this. And I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. I want to do, these people have done so much. And that's what that piece represents. It represents the Titanic International Society. It represents the Titanic Historical Society. It represents the Swiss Society and the Netherlands Society and the British Titanic Society, because they are keeping these stories alive. And it's such more than it's just a piece of metal. But I'll sit there and I'll watch those people, and it's makes me, I know George would be very pleased to know that he's accomplished what he wanted to. There's been over 15 million people roughly worldwide that have seen the artifact exhibitions.
Yeah.
If you're anti-salvage, don't go to one. It'll just make you mad. If you are undecided, go in with an open mind and just think, look at what you're seeing and what you're feeling, because those pieces are there. And that may change a few of them. You know, Bob Ballard was in favor of salvage. He has testified in Congress, and it's on the record, and it's a transaction, his words. Not transaction, but it's his transcript of his words supporting salvage. He flip-flopped later on. Eva Hart was against it. Charles Haas went to talk with her. And he will tell you this story himself. And he says, you know, Eva, if they're recovering, it means the story is going to continue. And she says she knew and she can understand it. She just hopes that it's always kept in museums and the stories continue to be told. So she was sort of accepting. She may not have been in favor of it at first, but she sort of accepted it later on in her life. And, you know, people say, well, if you recover something, you need to give it back to who it belonged to. Well, let's say that you recover a wallet. And the wallet belonged to a John Smith, and John had 3 children, and each of his 3 children had 3 children, and each of those had 3 children. So you're looking at over 40 ancestors that still may be alive. Which one do you give it to?
Yeah.
If there's 48 of them, 47 are going to be mad because you have to pick one to give it to.
Yep.
The other issue is it's going to cost you money every year to conserve that, to take it and put it in special treatments. To make sure that the leather, for example, doesn't become brittle and fracture and break. And if it's metal, you've got to treat the metal to make sure that the saline atoms, the salt ions, are withdrawn from the metal ions because of the saturation. So it costs some money, and we're talking a chunk of change. It's not just, you know, pocket money. That these things have to undergo conservation. So who pays for that? So there's a lot of questions like that. The third question is, in America, we have car insurance. If I wreck my automobile and my insurance company totals my car and pays me for it, they then own that wreck.
Yeah.
I don't get to keep what's in it. It belongs to them. And so Lloyd's of London paid for the losses. So Lloyd's owned the rights to the wreck, and RMS Titanic had to pay them, I think is either 1.5 or 1.7 million US dollars for the rights to own what was in the ship. So there's legal precedents that Admiralty court law started in the 15 and 1600s. Everybody that had a navy got together and said, look, let's make some rules that all of us will agree to, because we all share this ocean.
Yeah.
And they discussed it. They make these admiralty laws. The countries honor those admiralty laws. And it's how we've operated. And that's what the Admiralty Court rules. So if had a little 7-year-old boy stand up and said, needs to be left alone. You need to leave him alone. You're a grave robber. His mom's going, you know, like this. And so I asked him, I said, do you believe those things need to be destroyed? Oh, no. Oh, no, no, no. And I said, but if you don't recover them, they will be. And he said, I said, yes, how you can save them. And he goes, how? And I said, you have to recover them. And his mom came up afterwards and she said, I hope you know you've messed his mind up. He's going to be debating this for months. And that was my purpose, is to, a lot of people are just echoing it because of emotion. And they're not thinking of everything that's involved. There's more to it than just, you know, leaving it down there.
Yeah. And I think the big piece. Hello, Louis. You vanished for a little while.
Hello, I did. I was expecting to be short, but family came in for a drink or two. So I just muted myself and closed my video, but I've been listening in every so often. So,
oh, that's very good. You disappeared, had a couple of drinks, and you've popped back. That's good. But I think,
but I do apologize about that.
That's totally fine. the big piece, it's interesting, just with what you were saying there, Bill. I think it's such a good visual representation that encapsulates the whole story. You know, when I look at the big piece, the rivets always really catch my eye, because someone put, or multiple people put, each of those rivets in. You know, it wasn't a machine, it was men did that. And as they were doing it,
one hammered and there was one on the backside. Absolutely.
Yep. And they'd have done that with pride. And so just to look at each of those individual rivets tells a story. The portholes, you know, did someone look out of those? And, you know, that tells a story. The violence of the sinking, you know, the jagged, sharp edges, that tells the story. You know, for so long it was denied that the ship even broke. And yet here we have the big piece that kind of, you know, obviously the wreck was found in two pieces. I just think it's such a good visual representation of the ship and its story in its entirety, from birth to death. I'd love to see it. I really would. I've never been to America, but I know it's going to be the thing that makes me go. I need to see it. It's just one of those things I need to do in my life.
Right now, we're thinking, I host a Titanic conference every year. Titanic Con is what we're calling it right now. We usually meet in August. Our meeting this year is the last weekend in August, but we're thinking for 23, we don't have it written in granite yet, but to do it this 25th anniversary weekend in Las Vegas. You ought to come and be a part of our conference. And, you know, my group's going to get to go in and see it as much as I want them to, because,
Yeah.
you know, we're going to do that. That's going to be the main reason we're there, is to celebrate the big piece. One of the things that's neat, Aaron, is the effort it took to raise this piece. It was not easy. It was not as simple as recovering something from the debris field. But I went to great detail in the book about how when it came up, you would think people would cheer because they finally brought this piece to the surface. But there was a moment of, yes, we've done it. And then there was a long feeling of what it represented and how important it really was. So we weren't jumping around like we just won a game or a match. We did for a moment. Yes. Then it settled into, this is for them.
That sounds a lot like when Robert Ballard spoke about when they saw the wreck for the first time, you know, and they had this sort of big celebration, and someone said Titanic sinks in 20 minutes, and they all went quiet. No, it sounds like that same sort of atmosphere, that's like that same feeling towards it. And is it true that I remember seeing some of the big piece, it actually fell at one point on its way up?
The first time we attempted to recover it, we meaning the Titanic group that I was a part of, was in 1996. I was out there. That was the first time I was at the wreck site. A ship that was meant to raise it out of the water was called the Jim Killebuck. The Killebuck had on it a small A-frame, and the A-frame was not substantial enough to bring the big piece up. So Titanic had, RMS Titanic Incorporated had contracted for the Killebuck to change that and get a large winch that it could pick it up and move it. When the Killebuck arrived at the wreck site, they had not done what they had contracted to do. So you're trying to pick up a 17-ton piece with a 12-ton winch. It's not going to happen. So one of the ways that I got involved is, we're at the North Atlantic. This piece was supposed to be put on the back of the Killebuck and taken to Halifax. They couldn't get it out of the water. Hurricane Edward was coming toward us. What do we do was the struggle. And so, being a physics person, I sat down and I did some calculations, and I did some 2 or 3 different perspectives. I tried, there's solutions to every problem. One just has to analyze it and come up with the best choice. And I came up with a proposed way to save it. The captain of the ship came up with a second way, his way. This is the captain of the Killebuck. And he ended up choosing his own way over my way. That's his right. That was his choice. And I said, I tried. It was, it was legitimate. My way was, I felt, was pretty strong. So when Hurricane Edward hits, imagine you have a ship and you've got this 17-ton piece doing like this in a hurricane.
God.
Okay. That's actually a good visual. There you are, Aaron. See yourself in my phone. So it's just a matter of time before this happens.
Yeah.
So they had to cut this piece free and let it drop back down.
Hmm.
So that was in 96. Nautiel had already departed, so they could not come back after the hurricane and try again. So in 1998, they brought a ship out called the Bay Supporter, yellow with a light blue trim on it. Beautiful ship, wonderful crew, very professional crew. And they discussed what they were doing before they even started it. They knew, okay, if they had contingencies for 2 or 3 different options. The big piece rises up, they hook it up. They, is everybody ready? Let's start the process. Now they were saying it in French, of course. And all of a sudden the winch starts lifting. Here comes the big piece. And it worked clockwork. It was absolutely beautiful. And it comes over, they rotate it around, they lay it down. They put it on a bed of ropes. The ropes acted as the packing. It was a little flexible. It wasn't
Yeah.
good. And then they sat there with a hose pipe and they put some hoses and sprayed it with water so that it wouldn't dry out on its way to Boston.
Did the drop of the cutting it loose, did that cause any significant damage from, like, when it was first taken away and prepared to be lifted, and the next time you went, was it, oh, that's changed? Or
the closest thing that I could tell, I've got a picture here. There's what the big piece looked like.
Yeah.
Okay, this lower part bent. As it was hitting the ground, it sort of bent. And it stuck in the sediment. So it was stuck for a while, and it took it a while to get loose from the suction of the sediment. And when that piece came up, it was a little bit bent, and that was instead of formed and straight. So it did do that just a little bit.
And is that what's referred to now as I think we were speaking about it earlier, the big little piece? That's
the little piece, right?
The little piece, yeah. And I was saying to Aaron earlier, I remember in 2003, so I was about 6 years old, and they had the Titanic exhibition at the Science Museum. And I remember seeing a piece, and for some reason in my mind, it's always been the big piece, but has it traveled? Has it left Las Vegas, or would that have been the big piece that I would have seen?
To begin with, it traveled. The problem was that you've got a 17-ton piece. So you have to practically get in a huge, expensive crane to come in to lift this off the flatbed of the truck, to put it in a mechanism that you can take it into an exhibit. That was extremely costly. It was time consuming, and it put wear and tear on the big piece. So the decision was made to make the big piece static, leave it in one place, stationary, and so that people could come through there and move it as little as possible. Does that perpetuate the life of it? I would think it might be a positive thing. The bad part is, like you said, people in England can't see the big piece if it doesn't come to England. Same way with Canada. And that's sad. George had talked about bringing up a smaller piece that's similar, that could travel. That was mentioned at one time when we were at his house, that, he could come up with, you've got the big piece, and then come up with 2 others that could go in the traveling exhibits, because you only have one big piece. And
what was the kind of the decision making that went into, so the big piece's home at the moment is the Luxor in Las Vegas. Why is that? Because I assume I'd seen someone mention that they thought it was because of the footfall, because of how many people go to Las Vegas just even before you've got a section in the Titanic there, and now you've got a section of the Titanic there. That footfall was a big part of it.
that had to be part of that decision. I was not a part of that decision, but you have to have good traffic. You have to have good traffic. The Luxor has been very receptive to Titanic being there. I do know that during COVID, when nobody traveled, they worked with the company so that they wouldn't go bankrupt paying for an empty exhibit because nobody was traveling.
Yeah.
And so that was shows you that they care and that they had.
Yeah, that's incredible.
That was very, very nice of them to do that. They didn't have to, they chose to. And so I personally am very appreciative of that they wanted to help out in that way. George wanted to make the exhibits. The early ones were about the artifacts with a little bit about the people. And his plan was, after the first year or two of the first American exhibit was in 96 at Nauticus in Norfolk, Virginia. And then they went to the Pyramid in Memphis, Tennessee. They went to St. Petersburg. And then the takeover occurred somewhere around that time. But his plan was, now that we've started the exhibits, let's use what we have here and start adding in the stories, the more people stories to humanize it, like you said earlier, to make it really special. And the second group that came in, that wasn't their priority. The new management in 1999, the exhibit that's there now is probably about 80% what it was in 2001. They may have changed some of the signs. They did add the big piece. They did add some of the things they recovered in the 2000 expedition. One of the things they recovered in 2000, which was very special, was they found a black bag. In America, some of our old shows used to show the doctors carrying their little bag from house to house. It was a bag similar to that. And when they got it up on the surface, there was an aroma, a scent coming from it. And it was the bag of Adolf Saalfeld. And Adolf Saalfeld was a parfumier. He helped make perfumes. And he had vials of these different scents, SCENTS, scents from those. And one of them had broken, and you could smell it as it came up out of the water.
That's incredible.
So they have those actual, the liquids that made those scents. And at one time, a group was going to license to reproduce some of those. And then the owner of that company, I think somewhere somebody said, oh, these are the death scents that were on Titanic. You're going to think anybody's going to buy these things? So I don't think that went anywhere.
Yeah.
Part of a discussion.
I think those also went traveling with when I saw the exhibit in 2003, because I do remember there being a glass box and it had a small dotted hole. You could smell it. And I remember going, it's still got that smell. You know, they had that, and they also had a piece where you could touch part of the wreck, and those bits from like 2003 really stick out.
And we did mention those little kind of perfume vials earlier when we recorded, because it's incredible that it's still in there and that it still has its scent. But you know, just like you're saying, you know, who would want to add a death scent? You can't separate these two things. So you know, something amazing like, oh, we found perfume, and it's like people died, and it's like, oh, it's like, you know, you start celebrating. Even like when he said you raised the big piece, it came out of the water, and there was a little kind of yay, and then it was like, oh, because there's always that kind of, you know, it's a kind of tale of two sides. But that's incredible that the perfume still had its scent. Something I wanted to ask you, and it just kind of came into my head there. So the executive order was to prevent anything being taken from the bow of the ship, being detached or removed. So what about the stern? So say, also I know that the stern is ravaged and it's pretty much wide open as it is. But say, for example, someone was able to get into the kind of third class common area that was in like the far end of the stern, and say that there was stuff in there, which, you know, there might have been people, in fact, actually more so than the bow, there definitely would have been people in there at the end. God only knows how many pairs of shoes are heaped in the stern. So would that be okay? It's not okay, but that would be legal to take that.
The order covered the bow.
Mm-hmm.
So if they did find artifacts that they chose to recover in the stern area, they could. Now, you mentioned the shoes. It's very interesting. Bob Ballard showed his famous picture of shoes, and he said, everywhere there's a pair of shoes, that meant there was a body.
Mm-hmm.
That's not necessarily true. Yes, there were probably a few bodies that landed on the bottom of the ocean that were near the ship. But, you know, Louis said something interesting a minute ago. You've got 2.5 miles and people that died on the surface. Now, this is, I don't mean this to sound callous or cold, but if they passed up here, and they would not go straight down.
Mm-hmm.
The currents would take them and drift them all over the area.
Yeah.
You know, all over the area. So likelihood of this was less, you know, less than 1,000%. Okay. Over here, maybe 2 or 3 miles away is likely, because if you've got a 2-knot current and it takes you more than 20 minutes to fall, you're going to go 2 knots with the current. So could some of the bodies have been with those shoes? Very likely. Look at the shoelaces. If you and I are on a ship and we're running around trying to survive, our shoes would be tied. Many of the laces are found untied. And it has been my statement and my theory is, if they're untied. Now, according to one of the historians, a second class or a first class passenger would have taken their shoes. A steward would have taken the first class, but a second class would have put their shoes in the hallway so the steward could come by and buff them up as he's going down the hall. Mm-hmm. And they would be there the next morning all nice and shiny and buffed and ready to go. So all these shoes could have been just sitting in a hallway. And that's where some of these may be, because as the ship hit, whoosh, you've got the updraft theory of everything rushing through to push out the broken end of the forward part, the bow, the broken end, and it would have washed out into the debris field. That is a very viable theory. Of course, you know, theories can't be proved wrong, but it's tough to say, can't prove them all 100% correct either. But
because that's how the candelabra and the D-deck reception, that's how that ended up, where they found out that it would have come out with this huge surge. That's interesting to think. Or even just a pair of shoes had been in a trunk of some sort, and obviously the trunk has rotted away and disappeared, and then you're left with the shoes. But about the laces, that's really fascinating, because I wouldn't have kind of twigged that.
Yeah.
The famous picture that has been shown about, here's where a person came to rest because these are the boots. And just like you said, you can look around it and see the crate that they were in, and it's sitting on the raincoat. So the raincoat and the boots were in the crate, and it was down probably in engineering. And that's what they would wear when, to keep from getting messy when they had to do some of their repairs, I guess. But the 2 boots are sitting there on top of the raincoat, and you can actually see the frame of the crate around it. And I don't think a person would have been in the crate like that.
Well, we spoke about earlier on the previous podcast where we spoke about bringing the bodies up, bringing the items up, not the bodies. And I sort of brought up the point of, you know, how likely is it that a body from the surface would have come down and, you know, still been intact by the time it got to the bottom? You know, the amounts of pressure, the shoes staying, you know, even the shoes staying on the body, like if the you know, you've got that crushing pressure, like how likely is it that a body would have actually landed there? Because I don't see it. You know, there's also the thing about the mother's shoes and the child's shoes next to it. But how likely is it that those bodies made it down intact for the shoes to be laying in that spot?
I think it's very unlikely. I'm not saying it's not possible, but I'm saying it's unlikely that they would have stayed together like that. I think it's more of, you know, they were washed out together or something like that. because of the drift factor that was involved. Bill Sauter has done something that was incredible. He had taken the debris field artifacts. And what he did was he had the sonar plot of the bow, and then he had the artifacts in their appropriate positions where they were found. And he colorized all the ones from the upper deck and all the ones from the second deck and all the ones believed to be from the third deck, all the way down. And you can see that the ship split apart early. It's the lower ones that had the biggest scatter pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And as you went higher and higher, it came closer to the bow. And that was a very significant piece of analysis in my eyes. And Bill would be the one to engage in that conversation a lot better, because he knows you can show him a piece and he'll tell you who manufactured it, where it went on the ship, what it was used for, why they changed from a different piece. Bill's knowledge is incredible when it comes to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had done that with the different artifacts. And I was just fascinated at that scatter pattern. And it leads a lot of support to that surge theory that the water went washing through as it hit. Yeah. And just a great piece of work and analysis on his part.
And that's the thing, we can't prove it either way. But if we were to one day prove that all these pairs of shoes weren't actually bodies, and that they were in trunks, that they were in suitcases, or that they were in hallways and got washed out, that kind of blows a hole in the defense of, oh, it's a final resting place, which for some it absolutely is. But as long as people have that to kind of hold on to, and we can't prove it either way. And I can understand it is a very emotive kind of subject. But I think, Louis, you were kind of otherwise engaged when we were discussing it, but it is worthwhile. I think, raising artifacts, having them on display. Again, people aren't doing it for profit, or they shouldn't be doing it for profit. I think in 2006, a life jacket sold for £43,000. I mean, that's insane money. The violin, Wallace Hartley's violin, that sold for a lot. I don't know where that currently is, though. I don't know if that's in a private collection or if that's now on display somewhere.
It's a private collection, and it comes out to tour occasionally. We have a Titanic attraction museum here in Tennessee. It's the Pigeon Forge attraction. And the people that own it also own the one in Branson, Missouri. And it'll come to one of those two for about 4 or 5 months, and then it'll go to the other one for 4 or 5 months. And I've seen it on display at a UK exhibit. Mm-hmm. And so the owner, who requested, not to be named, contacts those people and makes those agreements. And that's how they do it.
Yeah. I've never seen any artifacts myself, having not been to America, but I went to Belfast and I went to the Titanic Hotel, the Titanic Museum, and even just standing where she was built, they've painted the outline of the ship on the ground so you can walk, the length and the width of the ship. And if you know the layout of the boat deck, then you know where you're standing. Just being there was I can't really put it into words how it felt. So I don't even know how I would feel if I was to look at or touch something that was on the ship, considering how I felt standing where she was built.
Surreal is what a lot of people say. It's beyond real feelings.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you a secret: if you get ever able to go to the wreck site, even though you're on the surface, when it turns 11:37 at night, ship's time, you know what happened, and you're on the deck and you're looking out in that water. And we did this at both expeditions. Quite a few of us were out there the first few nights particularly, and we heard the water hitting the side of the ship. And there's a moon, and you could see the path of the moon across the water as it comes towards you, and you see that little silver path of the moon, and you really can hear them. You can hear them. And first night we stayed out there, and I said, it's 2:17. And nobody said a word. And a couple of minutes later, somebody goes, it's 2:20. And oh, mercy, you want to talk about being hit and overwhelmed with emotion, is we could feel the presence of where we were, the importance of where we were. Even though it wasn't the right date, it didn't matter. We were at that spot, and it was very reverent. Those that didn't care went on to bed. Those of us that cared stayed there.
I don't think we can top that. I think that's I couldn't have written a better ending if I tried. That I had chills listening to that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever considered doing like audiobooks, Bill, but you've got a really good voice for it. I think you should contact Audible and do some reading of books, because I would certainly purchase them. Brilliant storyteller.
Yeah, I mean, just that bit at the end is like, I've been to, there's a Titanic exhibit in London at the moment. I've had some things to say about it, but they've got artifacts there which is, I've seen the one in 2003, touched a part of the Titanic, and I was 6 years old, but even then it meant something. And for you to actually be there and build something, it's just, I can't compare the two, but it's incredible. And I've done the same as Aaron as well. I've been to the Belfast exhibit as well, and been to the dry dock and the nomadic and stuff like this, and it's just none of that compares to I think being at the site. It's just incredible.
Yeah.
Well, if you fellows work up a program and all your followers want to meet you over at the Luxor in Las Vegas, and you work up a trip, you let me know and I'll try to fly out there and meet you, and we'll take the tour. And I'll tell you
100%. That would be incredible. Yeah.
That really would be. Yeah. Thank you so much, Bill. This has been a pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed this too.
Absolutely. It's an honor being here and having a chance to share a passion. You guys have the passion for it. You're not getting paid a lot of money for this, I know. Nobody working Titanic makes a lot of money except for one or two people. You have to make a movie or a lot of documentaries to do that.
Yep.
But this is my way to help remember something that was magnificent and beautiful that changed so drastically. And the people that were involved had no say in it. It was going to happen to them no matter what. And, one of the things we do, we had 9 family members at one of our 2019 conference. They all talked about their mothers or their grandmothers and told us great stories like that. But it all boils down to the same thing: is each of those people that talk about their family members are trying to share 2,228 people's stories, not just the 1 or 2 family members they had. But that's one way to do it. And we give them that opportunity, and we welcome them and embrace them. And it's very special to us to be able to help continue this. Thank you two guys and all the rest of your group for caring enough about something that happened 110 years ago. And, it's not going to keep Big Ben working on time. It's not going to make the Statue of Liberty, shine any brighter, but it will make our hearts feel a little bit more special about this event.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's really kind of you to say. I think at the end of the day, all roads kind of lead back to the people that were on it. And I think that's why we do this. That's why you were part of the team that raised the big piece. It's all about the people. And I think as long as we're doing this, and as long as you're still gracious enough to appear on podcasts, that's what we're doing. We're keeping their story alive.
I feel like for people, it's easy to look at a film and think, oh, that's, those are some cool visuals. But, for us, it's trying to remember that they are still people. like you or I, this could have happened to anyone, you know, and it's that human connection that I think is so important to keeping this story going and alive.
Yeah.
We'll see what we can keep doing. And guys, you keep up the good work, and I'm going to keep plugging away here, and we'll make good things happen for this, to tell this story.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bill.
Take care, guys.
Thank you, Bill.
It's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you.